like my right now. Just to kind of info that
They're actually doing it all. I don't know. So I can send you that as well.
Yeah, right now I'm doing an internship for like lobbying.
I know, kind of starting to
Busy, but it's really interesting.
I tell you what, somebody wants to go with that next mask. That's gonna be Benson mask.
Yeah, that's really cool. Right now I'm basically working on the behind the scenes,
I was
like
just
the
looking for
policy.
it.
So that's interesting. It's another area that
Yeah,
I'm
I'm new
interested
to this training, so I'm more like in the filling out the forms. I'm like, okay, let's see what they look at.
Exactly. I'm just thinking too.
That'll come tonight. Hey, oh yeah, are you coming?
No, whenever you can send it.
Yeah, I'll send it to you
Okay.
right now.
Thank you.
5:30.
Answer?
Right.
Yeah.
González Gutiérrez.
I gotta do it long. No, just like.
Price, rhymes with choice. Yeah, that's a weird one. No, that's okay.
I was
Not
all
at all.
around.
Right? Yep, I know. I know many probably in this room have gone through their entire life.
See, Robert, now I'm gonna take pride when folks are like, price. I mean, like that's Croix.
That's right. Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Price rhymes with choice. Yeah, no, I've got my whole life with my name mispronounced as well, so
I know.
yeah, I think the newest one is Price, yeah. That's okay. I get all of it.
Oh, I know.
Nope, fair enough.
Good morning. We're going to get started here in just a second. I would ask those people who are with us in person to please mute your phones so they're not picked up during this session. Thank you all for joining us today. This is going to be, I think, really enlightening and important work. And with that, I will turn it over to our panelists.
Good morning. First, let me start off. Usawayu, good day and good morning. My name is Michael Benitez, and I serve as the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion here at the Metropolitan State University of Denver, Colorado's largest HSI and most diverse campus. On behalf of MSU Denver, I am truly honored to welcome our partners to present the 2021 Colorado Latino Policy, and thank you all for joining us this morning for our briefing on the 2021 Colorado Latino Policy Agenda. Before I share some brief welcome remarks, I would like to acknowledge the indigenous people and the land of Auraria and the broader Denver area. MSU Denver honors and acknowledges that we are on the traditional territories and the ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne and the Arapaho nations, among many others. And we also recognize the community and families of the Auraria displaced by the creation of this campus in order for MSU Denver and other institutions we share the campus with to be able to have a place that we now call a learning community. This project, led by community organizations with some support by our university, fits well with our mission as a diverse, comprehensive, anchor mission and open access institution. I would like to express my thanks to the Political Science Department here at MSU Denver, who served as a partner in helping conduct the research. And we are pleased to host you all today to learn more about Latinos' views on a host of topics. We are particularly interested in this effort for a variety of reasons, but primarily because diversity is truly one of our primary and core values here at the university. Close to half of our student body identifies as students of color, and since February of 2019, MSU Denver has been designated a Hispanic serving institution with close to 30% of our students self-identifying as Latino and or Hispanic. And we have for some time now been committed to even leading the way in serving and assuring that we are serving DACA and undocumented students. As a university, we take pride serving as a facilitator of the exchange of ideas and the pursuit of knowledge, which is why we are here today. Part of our goal as an institution of higher learning is to engage the community at large in scholarly inquiry, creative activity, and the application of knowledge. We are proud to be part of this community-led, MSU Denver supported groundbreaking study that will serve to fill a tremendous void in our state's understanding of Latino public and political opinion. This program provides advocacy trainings and briefings on policy issues that most impact Latinos in Colorado. Latino Advocacy Day, or LAD, is a day-long advocacy experience that draws statewide participation with over 200 participants, mostly Latino youth. It was founded by Dusty Gurule over a decade ago. It continues to help promote active civic engagement and advocacy among Latino youth and the community. The research makes clear that Latinos are highly interested in being more engaged in the political process, but often feel that the voice of the Latino community is excluded from important political decisions. This organization helps bring their voices to the forefront. Please join me now in welcoming Dusty Gurule, Executive Director, the Colorado Organization for Latina Opportunity and Reproductive Rights Action Fund, who, by the way, and I must add and brag a little bit, also happens to be MSU Denver alum, out of Chicana Studies, and a recipient of the Alumni Association's Making a Difference Award back in 2013. Dusty, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Benitez. This is such a pleasure to be here at MSU in this amazing new space. New to me, but I guess probably not new at the campus. So super excited to be here today. This report has been a long time coming. We've been thinking about this, planning this specifically for the last year, but I think Dr. Benitez referenced Latino Advocacy Day. This coming year will be our 16th annual, and so it's a perfect addition to our hope to engage community decision makers, elected officials, and really show the data, right, about where our community is, what our community needs, so that we can be intentional, strategic in how we address that, right, and what are those policy decisions that we all come together to pass and to put forward. And there are many noteworthy results in the report, and we're pleased that you've joined us to explore this research. And I will be joining my colleagues later, Alex Sanchez, to discuss the findings. But first, I want to, and so thrilled again to partner with Rob Preuss, who will, with the professor of the political science department, will walk us through some of the highlights of the report before we dig in a little bit more. So, Rob.
Thank you, Dusty. So before I start, I do want to say that it's quite an honor to be able to play such a, I think, an important but small supporting role for this data collection endeavor that was started by our partners, Las Voces and Protejete. What I want to do today is walk through our new data. There's a couple of big messages. We're going to talk briefly about the methodology, and then we'll walk through some of the policy priorities and the policy preferences. The storyline there is that the policy priorities and preferences certainly reflect what we may expect, also have a large regional consistency in some places, but also variation in others. Latinos also are interested in political process and are looking to be engaged, but are also somewhat disenchanted in the degree of inclusion in the political process and their voices in the political process. So let me start briefly by talking a little bit about our policy. We'll get into some of the partners. Certainly, we have a report that was led by the Colorado Organization of Latino Opportunity and Reproductive Rights, Las Voces Unidas de las Montañas, Colorado Democratic Latino Caucus, and Protejete of Conservation Colorado. These are our main partners that drove it, and I'm here mostly to explain some of the stats. That's my background. The methodology for this study, and this is an amazing new groundbreaking study with multiple layers that are included in order to give us really a triangulation into the Latino community and the Latino community's preferences about politics and public policy. The first in the study that I will be talking about primarily is a 1,000-person sample, statewide sample, telephone, web-based poll. It was conducted towards the end of August up through September 1st. This study itself, the poll itself, is noteworthy for a couple of reasons. It's one of the largest Latino polls in Colorado. It is large, but that largeness also allows us to say something about regional variation, which most polls we haven't seen and can do. And that's important because there is some variation both in the Latino communities, but also as we've learned over the last couple of weeks, that political geographic differences actually do matter as we think about drawing, for instance, district lines. The other two components of this report that you can read more detail about were a 168 person survey, sample survey of Latino leaders, community leaders, grasstops, grassroots activists, and they give another level of insight into what the Latino community is looking for, what the Latino community expects, and what the Latino community is concerned about in Colorado. And then finally, a number of in-person listening sessions where in-depth, engaged discussion and deep qualitative evidence can be pulled out to really understand not just the statistics, which we pull from the 1,000-person sample, but also the nuances that lead up to those responses. And I invite you all to read that report closely to get a little bit more detail. We'll be focusing primarily on that 1,000-person sample in this presentation. So we took a look at, so we're going to start out with policy priorities. And the story I'm going to tell right now is really about policy priorities, what Latinos think about the policies that are proposed that may address some of those priorities, move into the social demographics and some of the importance of bilingual communication, and then finally taking a look at Latinos' conceptions of the political process and the degree to which they are incorporated into that political process and their voices are heard. So perhaps not surprisingly, although I think importantly, we started off with a basic question about policy priorities at the federal level. We can see the top 4 priorities for the federal level were immigration, jobs and the economy, discrimination and racial justice, and dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, of course, as we fielded this poll in late August. Among other top priorities, we're dealing with education, healthcare costs, and affordable housing, which we'll see those latter two also play into the Colorado priorities as well. As we said, one of the benefits of this survey is that we can take a look at regional variation. Latinos, our population is certainly concentrated in the Denver Metro Front Range corridor, but we also have a good amount of variation in terms of cultural background, in terms of interests, in terms of experiences across the state. So we can see that we see some consistency, certainly among immigration reform, jobs in the economy, and discrimination at the high end. But we also see some variation across the states or across the regions as well. And so we can see, for instance, the healthcare costs are maybe less of an issue among Latinos living in the Eastern Plains, but prevalent among Latinos living in the West. We can go down each of those, maybe a little bit more in Q&A if you'd like. We also asked this question about dealing with issues, local issues here in Colorado. These somewhat overlap, although we can pull out a very distinct level of local concern that emerges from these responses. So the high priority issues, those issues that registered when we asked what about here in Colorado, what are the most important issues that you want local Colorados to address? We have affordable housing, reducing homelessness, creating jobs, and keeping us safe from the coronavirus pandemic. And of course, these play into these broader themes of economic justice, economic opportunity, and dealing with some real issues of rising costs of living and affordable housing. And those are things we can take away from it. These various regional variations within the state are less so, particularly among the top 4 issues. But we do see some variation as we go down into lower issues at the level of the statewide results. So for instance, opening things up and getting back to normal is a high priority for Latinos living in the West. But in the East, affordable housing dominated some of Latino concerns. And again, these are basically questions asking, given a choice of, or given the option to list 3 high priority items, what are those 3 items? So we can get some more than one, and it allows us to get a broader sense of what Latinos are concerned about. All right, moving forward, we then asked, well, okay, if you're concerned about priorities, what are those priorities? What are your preferences about how to deal with those priorities? And for the most part, what we find is that Latinos across the state, and regardless in many ways of regional area of residence, tend to support, right, public policies that expand access to services and resources to a much wider segment of the population. We'll dig down into some of these the specifics in a second, but note that we do have our survey results. Immigration reform, about 91% of Latino adults support immigration reform, 90% jobs in the support services to increase jobs in the economy. And we can go down the line. Note that the low end are in the 80s or 90% support for these top policy priorities. And we'll get into the specifics. Those are reflected to some degree also by our Latino leaders survey as well. So we can underscore this importance of immigration reform and preferences for immigration reform and dealing with and addressing issues of the economy, and to some extent discrimination and racial justice as well. So when we ask specific questions about what do you prefer or what do you support in terms of public policy prescriptions for dealing with high priority issues, well, this is what we get. And again, for the most part, overwhelming support for a whole variety of issues that expand services and resources to all Coloradans. It includes 2/3 of Latino respondents indicating support for passing laws to protect access to safe abortion and reproductive rights. 89% increase access to mental health issues, which has been a strong indicator both, or a strong concern both in, of course, urban areas, but growing in rural areas, both on the eastern and western plains, access to mental health, as well as healthcare issues broadly. As we go down the line, we can see that there's strong support across a whole range from expanding health insurance to increasing funding for K-12 education, down to what we might expect a bit more variation in terms of nuts and bolts job creation and growth issues. But you know, if you take a look at these three at the bottom, we have 95% support protecting and expanding policies that deal with living wage and providing living wage to and safe working conditions to Colorado's workers. Providing wage and benefits for farm and agricultural workers is one of the other top consensus issues. Nuts and bolts, economic opportunity, economic mobility issues are high priorities, but they also aren't that far above other levels of support for a whole variety of issues. These issues also, as we kind of dig down into the issues, dig down into environmental policy consensus, we can see that large percentages, and keep in mind that the graph starts here really, so that's 88% support providing resources to ensure the communities disproportionately impacted by climate change are provided with access to business opportunities in this transitioning economy, down to 90% support for new regulations to reduce air, water, and land pollution. And most of those policies in between, of course, had high degrees of support as well. Excuse me. When we take a look at education policy, and again, part of a theme of providing opportunities for Latino citizens and preferences for those opportunities, we see that 92% statewide, Denver 95%, even out west, 87% of Latino respondents indicated that a college education is very important for their children's future to meet economic needs and to have a career without expanding while making ends meet. And interestingly enough, those also are fairly consistent across regions. This reads from Denver down east, or Denver, sorry, statewide, Denver, east, west. And you can see strong support for the need for jobs, but also the need to broaden perspectives in college education and the anticipation that college education is both about jobs, but also about creating civically informed citizens. I think that speaks importantly to the role of higher education and the importance that Latino communities place on higher education. Affordable housing. Again, we can break down support for affordable housing as well, regionally. And this is actually a fairly broad and important consensus item. As costs, of course, of real estate costs have increased and the cost of housing has increased, not just in the Denver area, but broadly. And I think these concerns are indicative and these policy preferences are indicative of that breadth of issue. So support for affordable housing statewide, about 26% said it was an important issue. This is actually issue priorities, but that ranges from 31% in the East, but still a relatively significant factor or priority in the West as well. When we take a look at proposals to require housing developers to include affordable housing, we see broad support again across all regions of the state. No part of the state seems to be protected from rising costs and concerns about affordable housing, and Latinos want to do something about it. Economic priorities, again, not some bold bread and butter type of issues among the public, but we can see that expanding access and expanding perspectives and providing greater economic opportunities is a key policy preference for Latinos in the state and across the state. So from bolstering economic opportunities outside of the Front Range, not just focusing on Front Range development, to support for high-speed internet access, that service, that fundamental element of doing business in this century, to providing living wages and safe working conditions, and funding for small businesses, all are supported at least the high 70s, low 80s, and in most cases, high 80s and low 90 percentage points. Now, one of the real benefits from this survey, as I've mentioned, is that we can take a look at regional variation. In a lot of ways, we see fairly similar results across the regions, but we did want to point out a couple of key differences and then several key similarities. One major difference that struck us was that experiences with discrimination differed across region. We asked about particular experiences and the basis for those experiences about experiencing discrimination. And then we can take a look at folks that have essentially not experienced any of these elements. And what's remarkable to me, at least, and perhaps unsurprising to others, is the size of the proportion of Latinos within the West that have experienced discrimination in the Western region. And only about a third of Latino respondents living in the Western region have not experienced discrimination on the basis of a number of factors or a number of experiences that we took a look at. So that's a good takeaway, and we can talk a little bit more about that in Q&A. Other key findings by region, and these are similarities that are striking in that these are similarities that we might expect a good amount of variation given the natural resources and the resource utilization across regions in Colorado. So we may think, for instance, of the West as being pro-resource extraction to a greater extent and anti-government regulation in terms of environmental regulation and dealing with climate change and protection. But that's not really the case. There is some variation, of course, in this level of support, the strength of support, but overall support still is quite high in the 80s again and 90s across a whole slew of policy proposals, including prioritizing clean energy transition, new regulations to reducing air and water and land pollution, and even setting caps on emissions for all businesses in order to increase the quality of air in our environment. Those are all strongly supported, again, across regional responses. So the key findings generally in terms of our policy priorities and our policy preferences, to underscore once again, expanding services and resources to all Coloradans is a high priority and largely supported across the board in Colorado by Latinos. Support for high support for expanding access to health insurance for Colorado residents, certainly not surprising given our both rising costs of healthcare, but also a pandemic, right, that we're in the midst of. Making sure that residents have access to safe abortion and reproductive health. We may have expected a little bit more variation there, but this is fairly consistent and in large substantial majorities across all groups. Ensuring state residents have access to high-speed internet, again, and infrastructure spending, which plays key into some of our national debates right now as well. And they're very concerned with climate change. That support is fairly uniform across regions. And finally, really interested in being engaged in the political process, which is what we're going to talk about in a couple more segments. I'm going to briefly go real quickly through some of the socio-demographic details. Sometimes we take these as indicators just of getting a good sample, and that indeed is what we've done, but also they're indicative of a lot of the elements of politics and reaching out and outreach and mobilization that I think we need to keep an eye on. First of all, of course, the sample reflects what we probably know already about Colorado Latinos, about half from Mexican national origin. We have about 18% of our respondents were born outside of the United States. And importantly, partly to explain that high import that is placed on immigration reform, almost 50% of Latinos in Colorado know someone that is undocumented. And of those, 20% know a family member, and nearly half of those actually live with a respondent. So dealing with immigration reform is a personal issue for many, many Latinos in this country, in this state. We also want to note that this survey was conducted in both Spanish and English, and about 17% of our respondents chose to take the survey in Spanish. We think that's fundamentally important as an indicator of the need for bilingual communication. And indeed, that is what we found when we actually asked questions about what would you like to have, how would you like to have government and political communication delivered to you. That a good chunk, actually about 30%, wanted to have information in both English and Spanish. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about Latinos' attitudes about the political process. For the most part, we see that civic engagement, civic duty, and making your voice heard, being part of that small d kind of classic democracy is important to Latinos, and that's why they come out to vote. That's why they're motivated to vote in many ways. Although we are also able to test a few messaging, and this is something that we're all concerned about in terms of voter turnout. Latino voter turnout, by the way, is consistently lower than Anglo and African-American turnout in this state. Not unusual across the states, but something that is certainly room for working on in terms of increasing political participation and adding voice to our community. So when we ask, right, why do you vote, or what can make you vote, and some of the messaging, we found that about 82% of Latino respondents strongly agreed that when politicians usually ignore the community in Colorado, but when we show up to vote in big numbers, that's when things change and they listen to us. A sense of being excluded to some extent, but having that power, right, that efficacy, if you can, when you could go and show up at the polls, or in our state, right, drop your polls off at the ballot box. Also recognizing that if you don't participate, right, things won't change. But when you do, right, that the only way to change things for the better is to vote. So that notion of the importance of political participation at the ballot box is clear to Latinos. This kind of messaging of helping out, making things better, overcoming what otherwise is a sense of being ignored, requires going out to vote and dropping off your ballot. And those types of elements are key messaging that we think would be important for any group that's interested in engaging the Latino community. This also, though, plays into some other kind of questions about our current state of affairs. Do you agree or disagree with the following statements and concern about how impactful Latinos are? You can get over that with voting to some extent, but there's also these underlying concerns. Rich people, 84% said rich people have too much influence in elections. 76% are concerned that false information is spread to confuse voters. And that voters, and this is, I think, most problematic, is that voters are kept away from the polls voting locations through intimidation or violence. That's almost 50% of Latino voters that are concerned about that level of voter suppression in this state. That said, then that explains part of the response and the overwhelming support for increasing access to voting and making voting easier, not harder for Latinos across the state. And that's in this right-hand column. And of course, that being Latino and electing Latino representatives are actually very important to Latinos in Colorado. This certainly fits in with our recent redistricting debate issues, asking that fundamental question: does it actually matter to Latinos that someone from the community is in office? And of course, it seems to, right? People prefer candidates for different reasons. We ask, how important is it for you that a candidate is Latino? And more than 2/3 said it's either somewhat or very important that a Latino is representing us. In terms of deciding whether to vote in the 2020 presidential election, so hearkening back a year, how much were you motivated by wanting to show solidarity and support for the Latino community? This is what academics call linked faked or group consciousness motivated voting. And we see that over 70%, right, say it was either a great deal or a lot of their elements. And can we translate that then, is the question, into more concrete Colorado elections, which will be coming up next year? We ask, in thinking about which political parties and candidates you support, how much do you consider whether the party or candidate cares about the Latino community? And again, we see very high levels of agreement, thinking it's a great deal, about 1/3, an additional 36% say that it's a lot. It's important for candidates and parties and political organizations to reach out to Latinos. That outreach needs to probably be in bilingual, right, in both English and Spanish, and based on a whole slew of these policy elements, policy preferences, and addressing those policy priorities that emerge to the top of the priority list, both at the federal level, but also, I think, more importantly, for our immediate purposes, at the state level as well. And then finally, all right, and this is this is noting on redistricting that Latinos recognize the importance of the political process, recognize the importance of voting, recognize the importance of electing individuals that reflect their backgrounds, but also recognizing the more nuanced kind of processes of redistricting. Over 60% of Latinos think it's important that Latinos here in Colorado be included in the redistricting process, and over 89% think it's important, either very important or somewhat important, that Latino or that districts are created during redistricting that are created to maximize the political influence and power of Latinos in Colorado. The nuts and bolts, the minutia, to some of redistricting flows from the political process and political engagement, as well as the elements of policy priorities in Colorado. And these are really important results that we're finding. And I think what we're going to be doing now is kind of opening up to some discussion from our panel. So I'll pass it on to you, Dustin.
Thank you, Dr. Preuss. Such important information. And one thing I just want to add before I turn it over to my colleague here, Mr. Alex Sanchez. I think the reason that Color has been so involved in this and really helped to lead this is because reproductive justice work is intersectional. And so knowing and understanding that none of our community, none of us live a single issue life. And so being able to gather the information and ensure and look at our community as like whole, right? And so knowing that economic justice issues, discrimination issues impacting our families and friends who may not have documentation, like that is important to all of us. And so that's one of the reasons why we partnered with BSP Research. I just want to acknowledge them, who helped us think through how to really get to this multiple ways. And so we've got the poll, we've got the leader survey, and we did the in-person meetings with community in partnership with the Latino Caucus. Understanding that our community is not a monolith. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to leave anyone behind. And so all of our decision making, all of our policy thinking is for all of our community, whether you have documentation, whether you speak English, whether you're not old enough to vote yet. And so that was why it was so important for us to add these other layers of the research. For the most part, polls are done and they just target voters, and that's not all of our community. And so again, I think it's important that we did the poll and the research and the in-person meetings in such a way that we are bringing everyone along with us, and that it's for us and by us, and that we are committed to do this every year. And again, understanding the nuances of our community throughout the state and how we continue to build capacity and engage community in voting, in policy making, in policy decisions, and in partnership with the Latino caucus, and getting more people to run for office, right, who are reflective of our community, because representation matters. And so, you know, I think we're going to hear from Representative Serena Gonzalez Gutierrez. But before that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex to talk a little bit about some of the nuances of and some of the things that Dr. Preuss mentioned about the regional differences and things that we should think about as we're moving forward together collectively. And for Latino Advocacy Day, again, this is another layer of our work, of our overall policy vision work for all Latinos in our state. And that is scheduled, our 16th annual Latino Advocacy Day is scheduled for March 13th and 14th, 2022. So stay tuned for that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Alex.
Thank you, Dusty. My name is Alex Sanchez. I'm the Executive Director of Voces Unidas de las Montañas. We are based in Glenwood Springs. We cover the Central Mountain region that includes Summit County, Lake County, Eagle County, Pickens County, and Garfield County. And so we are obviously a partner that also happens to be focused on a specific region in Colorado. And we believe that that's critically important to ensure that all the work that we do as coalitions are reflective of the various communities. And while you've seen that we have partners at the executive committee and steering committee level, like Color, like the Colorado Latino Democratic Caucus, like Protégete, and others, we also have many regional partners that have been with us. They are organizations that are locally based, that know their communities best, and we will continue obviously to reach out and partner as we do these annual cycles year after year. For organizations like Voces Unidas, we care deeply about ensuring that policy in Denver at the state level is reflective of the various complexity and diversity that exists within our communities. And this is why we as a regional organization partner and spend lots of time in Denver to make sure that the body of work that's done to be able to help and shape some of the decision-making that's happening in Denver is reflective of the various voices, particularly voices coming from the Central Mountain region. And I'm sure other partners will argue that their communities are as important as ours. I think the data from this cycle, both the poll, but I think more importantly, the grassroots and grass top feedback that was captured both in the online survey as well as the in-person meeting, I think helps to put more context into some of the complexity and some of the needs, the wants, the visions, the desires of community members at the local level. And I think you see both in the poll and the rest of the data, some of those differences. While we may share similar thoughts, opinions, and interest in some issue area or solutions, there's also some complexity there where we might have more weight or more interest in different policy issues. For example, in the Roaring Fork Valley, where we happen to be based out of, we see that environmental justice, as well as expanding public transportation and other transportation issues are far more important to us and show up in the data a little stronger than maybe other regions. And if you haven't driven through I-70, you will know what we mean in terms of what happens when you block out an entire region of the state because of one interstate and some of the climate change that's happening in our state and the impact that it has on communities of color, like the Latino working families who live up and down that corridor. So we look forward, obviously, to this partnership. We look forward to also engaging more local regional partners in the Western Slope. The Western Slope is also not a monolith. monolithic group, right? We have many ecosystems and so much complexity, whether you're talking about Mesa County, whether you're talking about, the mountain communities, both whether that's Durango, whether that's Steamboat, whether that's Telluride, or whether it's the I-70 corridor, the Central Mountain region. So we look forward, obviously, as we move past this first year, that we also start to dissect the data and present the data in the way that better reflects also the various pockets of communities that are part of the state of Colorado. So with that, I want to turn it over to another partner, and speaking on behalf of the Colorado Latino Democratic Caucus is State Representative Serena Gonzalez Gutierrez.
Thank you, Alex. And I just can't thank enough all the work that has gone into this. So my name is State Representative Serena Gonzalez Gutierrez. I represent House District 4, which is located in Northwest and West Denver. So as you may imagine, a lot of the information I get is very Denver metro area focused. And I want to point that out because we took on this challenge during this summer to spread out and learn more about what's happening in the different Latino communities throughout our state to make sure that they know that they have a voice down at the Capitol. So I just want to cover a few key things that us in the Colorado Democratic Latino Caucus, took away from all of this. So, this research, as we've heard, is the first of its kind, very nuanced data that we're seeing come from this. I think a lot of times whenever we see polling done, and I think this was hit on earlier, it's either at the national level, but to have this kind of data and research polling done on a statewide level is incredibly important. We're at the state legislature have one of the largest Latino caucuses that we've ever had. We were at one point at 14 members, and right now we're at 13, which is still not reflective of the Latino population for the state of Colorado, but it is one of the largest that we've ever had. So, you've heard mentioned of this statewide tour, and I could say that many of us, myself and some of my colleagues, we toured the state to engage with and listen to the needs of the Latino community outside of the metro area. As you see, we went to Pueblo, Greeley, Glenwood Springs, and we wanted to listen to constituents in these different communities. We broke new ground with this tour by giving our caucus opportunities to learn about the regional nuances impacting the Latino community across the state. And not surprisingly, we know, and we've heard it many times today, is that our community is not a monolith. And the needs of Latinos in Glenwood Springs can be vastly different than Latinos in Greeley and in Denver or even in Pueblo. But there are also many commonalities. We talk about those commonalities being the access to affordable housing that we heard, healthcare, childcare, and quality of education are all important aspects of people's lives in each of these communities. And we, as the Latino Caucus, we're committed to building long-term collaborative partnerships to elevate these similarities and regional distinctions in our legislative work, which is why we showed up and we traveled to all these different places in the state. We're excited to use this information to inform our policy priorities as we look ahead to address deep-rooted systemic inequities in the next legislative session, which is about to start in January. So a lot of us are hitting the ground running. Because of these inequities, we know that Latinos suffer at a disproportionate rate when it comes to, especially we've seen that come to light during the pandemic. And many of us have stepped up in different ways, partnering with local communities to make sure that our community's needs are being met, not only in the legislature, but at the ground level in our communities with vaccine distribution, testing, and things like that. I just want to make sure I cover all these important things as I'm here to represent our 13-member caucus, the one me. Now we actually have this tangible data and information to ensure that the policies we bring forward are equitable and they take into consideration the needs of these families across Colorado, not solely those that live in the metro area. This research provides information to use during session to help us to begin to assess Will this legislation impact a significant number of Latinos? Was this identified as an important issue to the Latino community? And how can I incorporate more equitable language or approach to my legislation to either benefit or reduce harm to Latinos? So we think about those in the context of if I didn't bring a piece of legislation forward, would somebody else bring it forward, right, to address the needs of the Latino community? Or when we're looking at policy and we see that there's a need for language around equity, we want to make sure that we're able to step up and provide input to that. So not only are we using this information as a caucus, but we fully expect our colleagues down at the state legislature and the governor and decision makers at all levels of government to consider the needs, priorities, and growing political power of the Latino communities across Colorado. We know that data supports our efforts. We have proof of that. And we hope that this information is put to good use as we head into next year. We're still recovering. We're still in the middle of this pandemic and we're still recovering. And we want to make sure that we're doing this in an equitable way. We want to make sure that we look forward to ensuring that our state meets the needs of all of its residents, regardless of their ethnicity, their language, their background, their zip code, and their nationality. And so I am just really proud of all of this work that has been done. And, you know, this is, I can't say enough. I just have to point this out one more time, is that the polling, and Dusty, you touched on this earlier, the polling that we typically get is just of voters. And I have made this point several times to my colleagues in the Democratic caucus and just at large, is that those are not the only people we represent, is not only the voters. We represent all of our constituency and everyone that lives in our districts and in our state. So thank you again for joining us, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. I'm Curtis Hubbard with On-Site Public Affairs. Happy to have been brought on to help arrange today's events and analyze and present the data. We will be taking some questions here momentarily. I'm going to grab a laptop that has the Zoom presentation actually running on it, and I'll be right back. So if you are a virtual attendee, we'll start with you because we appreciate that you are out there, and we love that we have this technology that allows journalists from across the metro area, across the state to join us today. If you have questions, feel free to raise your hand or put them into the chat, and we will deliver them to our esteemed panelists here. While we wait on there, I will ask if anybody who's here in the room after that presentation has any questions that they would like us to address. Well, this could be easy.
Oh, thank you. Hi there. Yeah, I have a question regarding the methodology is all. When it comes to the sample size with surveying 1,000, these are the results rather of 1,000 Latinos. How many was it actually sent out to though? And what was the initial goal? Like how many people did you want to have respond to the survey initially?
Let me just repeat that for the folks who are online. It's a question about the methodology, and while it's a 1,000 person survey of Latino adults, how many were actually contacted? And we don't have the pollster here with us today, so the rest of us will have to do our best to.
Yeah, and I don't know the overall total of folks that were asked to respond. Our goal is essentially to gather that 1,000 sample size. And then that 1,000 sample size gives us enough sample that we can make accurate, reasonably valid conclusions about differences across regions. Most of the samples that we see are in the 500 range, and they're dominated by Front Range, Denver corridor respondents. So that was the goal. It was purposive to get to 1,000. Once we got there, we were done.
Well, if I could just add, I think one of the things that we made very clear as a regional partner of Voces Unidas is we wanted to oversample folks outside of Denver. For us, it's important to make sure that all the polling, just like it has been mentioned, that some of the polling, sometimes it's national, sometimes it's statewide, and oftentimes ignores some of the rural communities. So for us, part of this agreement is to make sure we oversample rural Colorado, in this case, Latinas and Latinos in rural Colorado. And so that was part of the target, making sure that we were more representative of outside of Denver.
I think as a political consultant, one of the things that really was informative to me was, and Dr. Preuss touched on this, the percentages of folks who took the survey in Spanish, 30%, and then 17% who said they preferred to get their political information in Spanish. That's important for those of us who work in politics to understand, is that you have almost 1 in 5 voters who you need to communicate with in Spanish rather than English. Any other questions from folks in the room? Well, let me turn it over to you all. Is there anything else that you wanted to highlight? Anything that you wanted to bring light to while we look to see if we have any other questions from our online attendees?
I think one thing I would add, and I think we've already mentioned this, that one, it's important that we have community-informed decision-making, and that that this process, again, is led by and for our community, and that we are committed to do this and continue to grow our partnership, as Alex mentioned, because we know we can't do this work alone. And Latinos, there's many of us, we're the 2nd largest population in the state of Colorado. And so we look forward to continuing work with partnerships, expanding our partnerships, and really bringing all of the beautiful nuances of our entire community to decision makers. And so that they have that perspective, and in partnership, right? That we're leading the conversation for us and by us. And so just wanted to add that.
Great, thank you. And as a reminder to everyone, the full report is available online for download at Colorado Latino Policy Agenda.org. It's also linked on the press release that's been provided to those of you who are here in person, and also those of you who are attending online. And the digital version also has a link to the crosstabs of this data, where you can look deeper to get the information by region. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Preuss to close us out. Thank you.
I actually had one more thing I wanted to add, if that's okay. I just wanted to point out that, you know, the Colorado Democratic Latino Caucus is a 501c3. So, and all of the organizations, in fact, that were part of this entire process, you know, operate as 501c3s. And so I just want to point out that this was taken from a nonpartisan approach, in really just wanting to hear from the community what their actual concerns are. And that's what was of most importance to all of the members of this collaboration. So I just wanted to point that out, and that that we didn't look at it from that lens.
Well, and I think you very much accomplished that goal. I mean, this is a groundbreaking report. As someone who studied Latino politics for many years and focused on Colorado, not as involved in making decisions as our partners, I can tell you that this is a groundbreaking report that will move understanding of Latinos and Latino preferences in Colorado to a much higher level than we've had in the past. So a great contribution to civic knowledge as well. And we appreciate that from MSU's perspective. So with that, I guess, thank you all of our panelists for joining us. Thank you, audience, for coming. Let you know that our panelists are available for one-on-one interviews. If you have particular questions, you can pull out some of our students if you like. They're welcome to give you a younger perspective than the folks up here. And again, thank you for coming, and have a wonderful afternoon. I'm old enough to, I'm used to calling myself old.